Hi, welcome everybody. So tonight what we're going to do is have an educational session about understanding eating problems, eating disorders as eating addictions. There is a handout that goes with it. There will probably be inserted in this video a little later point, but I'm going to go, everybody that's with me tonight has a handout in front of them. So we're going to go over it together, and then I will stop the recording so that the people that are here can actually ask personal questions, but the recording won't record that. All right, so we're going to start with the handout that's labeled Definitions and Concepts. All right, so I'll read it and comment. Eating addictions, actually all addictions, whether ingestion or behavioral, are characterized by compulsion, progressive loss of control, repeated use in spite of adverse consequences. That particular model, those 3 bullets on the top of the page, came from a doctor named David Smith. And he actually, any of you who are old enough to remember the Haight-Ashbury district in the 60s, he ran the free clinic in the Haight-Ashbury district in the 60s. I heard him speak at a conference in the 80s, and he had the simplest definition of identifying addictions. What he said was, when young people were coming into his center, his free clinic up there, he didn't know if he was looking at mental illness. He didn't know if he was looking at just acting out adolescent behavior, or was he looking at an addiction. If he could identify compulsion, progressive loss of control, repeated use in spite of adverse consequences, he knew he was looking at an addiction. I thought that was brilliant. I took those 3 things, and underneath each of them, I put what it looks like when it's an eating addiction. So under the compulsion for us, it is an irrational driving need to eat. That can also be kind of tweaked a little bit, an irrational driving need to control what we eat, an irrational driving need to control body size, shape, and weight. But the key word is irrational. When an addiction is in its early stages, it does feel like it's an answer, it's the solution, it's the stress reducer. But as the addiction becomes full blown, we're doing it and we don't want to do it. It isn't giving us what we want. It isn't taking our life where we want it to take us, and we still feel driven to do it. So that word irrational simply means the addiction is full blown. The second component, there is a progressive loss of control. So in a dieting culture, which most of us live in, unfortunately, there is a progressive loss of control. We may be successfully able to do a diet when we're a teen or young adult, and then as it goes along, we have less and less success with dieting. Not only can the success limits the amount of time we can do it, we usually have extreme adverse consequences after the diet. And that cycle of on and off dieting can really damage the metabolic system in the body, to where you take 20 pounds off and you put 25 back on, eating the same amount you did before. And that cycle of always damaging that metabolic system can really harm the body over a few decades. So the first thing I list underneath the progressive loss of control is most of us are going to be heading toward obesity if we do not get an intervention, because most of us, if our attempting to control doesn't kill us, are going to be heading toward obesity. The second thing I list is that chronic dieting. And there is a chronic dieting dynamic of where in your head, you're always thinking about the diet. And I found that some people report to me that after a decade or 2 of on and off dieting, even if they even think about dieting, they go eat. They don't even start the diet. They just go and almost quote unquote break the diet before it even starts. The next thing that I list is, excuse me, something I call a secondary addiction to purging or starving. So in the work that I do, I don't encourage people to label themselves bulimic, bulimorexic, anorexic, but to really talk about those things as a style of control. They can be very deadly. They can turn into piggyback addictions. I've known people that are, have to have a bottom line around with the eating addiction around no vomiting, no matter what. no supplements or prescription drugs to suppress appetite, no matter what. But some people actually have to like putting that in their bottom line of what's the rest of the eating addiction, because they have that piggyback addiction of starving or purging. The third one, in the chemical dependency field, it reads repeated use in spite of adverse consequences. But I believe it needs to read for eating addiction, it needs to read repeated use and attempts to control in spite of adverse consequences. So our attempting to control can be more deadly and more health damaging than an active eating addiction. So I don't mean to minimize the bulimia, bulimorexia, anorexia, but if you can get somebody to quit vomiting, it does not mean that they have put the eating addiction in remission. That's just a style of control, a deadly style of control, but it's still just a style of control. The only thing I list underneath that are all the ways most of us have tried to control. So I'll read it. Attempts to control through chronic dieting, attempts to over-control through starving, restricting, with or without liquid fasts and or diet pill use or abuse, and attempts to eliminate the consequences of out-of-control eating through various forms of purging. So I try to give people a safe setting to take this addiction deadly serious. It can be very minimized out there in the world. Even in a 12-step community, I find that it can be very minimized. I try to give people a safe setting to take it very seriously. The bottom part of this page is my definition of eating addictions. I believe that they are an irrational driving need to eat, not eat, and or control body size, shape, and weight, characterized by attempts to control, over-control, and eventual loss of all control. It has the unique feature of manifesting in 4 primary addiction voices: the tormentor, the comforter, the dieter, and the minimizer. So I want to stop there and talk about that. I believe that all addictions have a unique feature of mind chatter that is almost encouraging us to behave in those ways that are insane, that are not taking our life the way we want it to go. What I try to help people do, excuse me, is become an observer of the mind chatter and learn language that separates from it. If any of you have read my books, in the newest book, I bet I say at least 12 times somewhere in the book, you have this disease, you're not it. You have an eating addiction, you're not the eating addiction. Over and over, we must make that separation, that we have this, but we're not it. Separating that, the chatter is one of the beginning tools of recovery, in my opinion. So I talk about the tormentor. Most of us want to get rid of the tormentor voice. You're never going to make it. You know, your butt's too big in those jeans. It's just the tormentor voice. But we need to also be aware of the comforter voice. Oh, you've had a hard day. You just need to relax a little bit. That Becky, she just takes this way too seriously. So be aware that you're going to have to recognize the comforter voice as part of the addiction as well. The dieter, for sure. I think most of us would like to quit dieting. We just don't know what else to do. So the calorie counting, label reading part oftentimes is not our healthy part, but our addiction part, the dieter voice. The fourth one is what I call the minimizer. And the minimizer is the most deadly one in long-term recovery. If you can get some long-term recovery, very often what I've found happens is the minimizer chatter is, look how well you've been doing. God, your weight is stable. Emotionally, life is great. I bet this is only an apple. What could this be? What problem could this apple be to just snack on an apple? And then people are off to the races again because the addiction gets activated with random eating. So the minimizer is very important, I think, in long-term recovery to be aware of. So I'm going to go back to the reading the handout. These voices are typically manifesting in an obsession with eating, an obsession with food, and an obsession with body image, which my opinion is it is the #1 relapse problem. We come into this trying to get rid of our dieting mentality. But very often what we unconsciously come in with, I'm going to do this, but if I don't get the weight I want, I'll throw it away. And that, again, can be the body image issues causing us to relapse from long term. The analogy that I use is an AA analogy. When we are in AA and we see a newcomer come in, and they're coming because the spouse left them and they want the spouse to come back. We're all a little worried for them because we know if the spouse doesn't come back, they may throw their sobriety away. So all we can do is hope that they end up wanting to be sober for themselves as opposed to the condition of a spouse coming back. For us, that's very similar to if we don't get the weight we want, if we don't get the body we want, then we oftentimes will throw it away. So I try to help people be very cognizant of all the body image issues so that we become an ally to our body out of love and devotion as opposed to critical, judgmental, what I call looksism bigotry. Okay, there are 3 common secondary obsessions: the obsession with nutrition, with health, and with exercise. These 3 secondary obsessions usually are falling in a category of attempting to control. So the point I'm trying to make there is I do think that oftentimes we get to the point where we know diets don't work, but we don't know what else to do. We say, wait a minute, I know there's some truth to healthy nutritional eating. I know there's truth to healthy exercising, healthy lifestyle, healthy attitude. And so we get a personal trainer and we get a nutritionist and we, go to a meditation class and a mindful class, and it doesn't make us not have the eating addiction because our agenda is to use those things to try to make it go away. None of those things would make an alcoholic a normal drinker. So we've got to be really aware that we want to change our relationship with those things, nutrition, health, and exercise, from spiritual principles. So the action that we take around picking foods to put at our mealtime, we want to use kindness, devotion, reverence for our body. That does not mean that we ban and restrict foods, but that we look at abstaining 100% of the time, but nutrition we can do 75% of the time healthy. Don't worry too much about the 25 as long as we're reasonably healthy. I have a comment here about purging. Purging can be described as getting rid of calories, often an attempt to control the consequences of overeating or to control weight. Purging can include vomiting, excessive exercising, laxative abuse, diuretic abuse, a binge fast pattern, etc. So that summarizes how I see the problem. The second page, which I want you guys to grab, how I see the solution. So this is where I'm going to focus on how I see the solution in detail. There are 3 bullets at the top of this page. These 3 bullets are really critical for long-term stable abstinence, long-term recovery from an eating addiction. So I'm going to talk about how I see those 2 phrases differently by giving you an alcoholism analogy. Long-term sobriety would mean you don't pick up a drug or a drink long-term. But in my opinion, long-term recovery from chemical dependency means you no longer yearn to pick up a drug or a drink in times of crisis, upset, confusion, etc. So the yearning can be removed, not the illness. The illness can go into remission, but the yearning for it that the addiction has set in motion with us can be removed. These 3 things are really critical for that. So the first one is getting it at a head level, but into the heart, that eating addictions have a biological base. There's been tons of research about that. Some of the research I like, I think it was from a research project I read, I'm going to say over 20 years ago. And it said that they found an abnormal dopamine receptor that predisposed people to being vulnerable to 4 categories. The first category is ingestion addictions. And they did include non-drugs. They included, nicotine might be a drug. Yeah, nicotine, caffeine. They did include I think they did include sugar, and then behavioral addictions like eating, like gambling, like sex addiction, like video game addiction. There are behavioral addictions. Then there are two more categories. There are compulsive obsessive disorders, and there are impulse control disorders like Tourette syndrome and ADHD. And you can have any mix of those. You can have only one. I happen to have two of them, both the ingestion addiction of drugs and alcohol, as well as behavioral addiction. I know people who have more than one, and I'm consciously medicating one with the other. So that was some research that I really liked, although because I've been abstinent and sober in recovery for 47 years, there was no research around that. And what I did is I took the approach to treat it like it was an illness, that seriously, not like a behavior problem, not like a character defect, not like a moral issue, but treat it like an illness. And thankfully, years later, there has been research from many, many universities that have said that addictions have a biological base. Okay, if we can get that at a head level, but into the heart, it can stop all the shaming and the blaming. We don't have to shame ourselves. We don't have to blame any situation or person in our life. We can just recognize we have this unusual illness and there is a solution. Okay, the second thing that we need of these three to get it to where we have that level of freedom where there is no yearning for the addiction is to understand, especially in the beginning, to understand triggers, which ones to avoid, which ones that we have to be prepared to walk through. In Narcotics Anonymous, they have a wonderful saying for a newcomer that says, don't go around your playgrounds, your playmates, or your playthings, which is great. The problem is, with eating addictions, you cannot avoid every playground, every plaything, and every playmate. You know, we've got a grocery shop, we've got a meal prepare. We've got things that are triggers that we are probably going to have to navigate through. So when I work individually with people, I help them try to identify trigger people, trigger environments, trigger emotions, trigger situations, trigger foods, so that in the beginning, to get some stability, we know which ones we can avoid and which ones we need to have a good solid plan for navigating around so we don't fall in a relapse hole. The third component is where the longer term, deeper work takes place. And that is uncovering and breaking any dependencies on the eating addiction. As we've gone along, as I mentioned earlier, in the addiction in its earlier stages, we may have discovered at a younger age that we can use the eating addiction to kind of give us a timeout from the world, to kind of suppress overwhelming emotion, etc. Those dependencies on the addiction have to be identified, and we need to break those in the longer term recovery if we really want the yearning to be removed. And so I talk about the process of that as I go into the next part of this page where it says eating addiction recovery primary needs. There are 6 of them here, and they are in a hierarchy. So the first and the highest need is we want to get it arrested, not from morality, but from responsibility. So if you had gone to the doctor and the doctor said, we're looking at an unusual form of epilepsy, and so I'm going to make a suggestion today that you check into some stress reducing classes. I'm also going to write you out a prescription that's going to help with the brain chemistry. You know, they wouldn't be shaming you. They would just be asking you for a partnership in working together to address this unusual diagnosis you got. That's kind of what I'm talking about. You have an unusual diagnosis maybe of an eating addiction, and there is a way that we can put it in remission. And it comes not just from responsibility, not from morality, not from shaming ourselves. The second one, we've got to have a bottom line, and this is what's going to put abstinence is what's going to put the eating addiction in remission. So I think this is unfortunately one of the most confusing things out there in all of these other programs that are trying to address eating problems is there's so many disagreements. What I have found is that we want to address it as a behavioral addiction. And so actually when I believe that we need to abstain from overeating, undereating, dieting, restricting, and purging. We want to abstain from compulsive eating, impulsive eating, random eating, and spontaneous eating. So when I list all of those things, usually people say, okay, well, what's left? And I say, here's how we practice abstinence. We begin our day within an hour or so after we get up with a planned moderate breakfast. 4 to 6 hours later, whether or not you're hungry, you have a planned moderate lunch. 4 to 6 hours later, you have a planned moderate dinner. No matter how hungry you are, it stays moderate. I help people understand that moderate is a range. I talk about it in my books as a range that we give like a number between 1 and 10. 1 would be the low end of moderate, 10 would be the high end of moderate. And I suggest people move around in that range. I do suggest they kind of stay away from a 1 and a 10 because you don't want to fall off the edge. But to move around in that range really gives us a lot of flexibility in life. It's not trying to be a 5, a 5, a 5, a 5. It's really what actually helps heal the metabolic system is to move around in that range. That breakfast, lunch, and dinner is the medicine that puts the eating addiction in remission. But I must tell you, we can plan in 4 meals a day. I've done that when I've traveled across a lot of time zones. I look at the schedule, I see, time-wise where I'm going to be when I went to Europe, sometimes in a 24-hour period, it worked out to be 4 meals. I've also had times when I needed to have some blood work done. So it's a fasting blood work. It's done at 10 in the morning. And so I plan a 2-meal day. But 99.9% of the time, it has been the 3 meals a day. And I don't consider it a break when I plan in the 4. And I don't consider it a break if I plan the 2. But those are high-risk situations. Just as a drug addict who has to stay abstinent from mind-altering drugs, if they have a condition where they have to take a medication, they can do it, but there can be no secrets, no self-medicating. So hopefully any questions you have about that one, write them down when we stop the video, we can talk about that. Number 3, we want to become an observer of this eating addiction chatter. Separate the self from the addiction. I have the addiction, I'm not the addiction. Starting to be an observer of the mind chatter and beginning to have language that exposes it. And the session I did earlier today, I shared what a client came up with. And so I'm going to share it in this group too. And excuse my language. When I told her, tell on the addiction, tell what the addiction is saying to you, and then what do you want to say back? And so she learned to say back, fuck you, you don't own me. And I thought that was the greatest thing. Excuse my language. I just thought it was the greatest thing. You don't own me. When we have language that has us separating from the addiction, we are moving forward. I have this illness. I'm not this illness. Once somebody has been abstinent from, I don't eat in between meals, no matter what, when the no matter what is in place, you would be amazed how quickly, within a few weeks or few months, the chatter in between meals goes to almost 0. But please hear this, all the chatter comes to mealtime. Not enough of that, too much of that. Oh, you really should just be impulsive and add a little bit on. Oh, that really wasn't what you wanted. That's just addiction chatter. That's why the word planned moderate meals is so important. When I was new in my first couple of months, I noticed, nobody told me about the voices and blah, blah, blah. I noticed that like 3 in the afternoon, I sometimes would morph into the addiction, like, how stupid is this? Like 3 meals a day is going to make any difference in my life? Well, I made the commitment. I'm going to keep my word today, but if I don't want to do it tomorrow, I'm not doing it tomorrow. Then when I woke up in the morning, I'd say, oh, thank God I'm not starting over. And that happened 2 or 3 times and I got it, that in the morning I was very separate from the addiction. and that I accidentally morphed into it by the afternoon. And that's when I started working on recognizing the voices and clearly separating, because it was me who woke up in the morning saying, oh, thank God I'm not starting over. So that observer is absolutely critical for the beginning. Number 4, we want to address the great obsession. I have found so many people feel like if they just get emotionally well enough, they get enough therapy, if they just get enough insight about themselves, their past, if they get spiritual enough, if they get the number on the scale they want, then I will be a normal eater and I will have the body and the weight that I want. Has to be smashed. None of those things, not getting emotionally well enough, getting enough therapy, getting enough insight about herself, getting spiritual enough, is going to make an alcoholic a normal drinker. But please hear this. All of those things will make sobriety better. And so all of those things will make our recovery from an eating addiction better, but it will not make us a normal eater. We can pass for normal. I'm sure I look fairly normal to people. I can't tell you how many times I've been, had a gym membership, and people who I don't know will say, I see you here all the time and your weight never changes. How do you do that? So what I say to people is, I figured out a long time ago, my life just works better if I only have breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I just never snack. I never eat in between meals. And they go, really? Like it's a phenomenon. All right, number 5. Uncover younger ages that had developed dependencies on different aspects of the eating addiction: weight, food, self-esteem, self-worth, stress reduction, etc. Always discovering how we've used our disease for protection and manipulation of situations and emotions. So back to my personal recovery, I probably had about a year and a half, and I realized I had the no matter what. I wasn't eating in between. I dealt with some body image issues. I got thinner than I wanted to get. And I just had to trust that, I was eating 3 moderate meals a day, reasonably healthy. This is the body that God wanted me to have. But I knew I needed to change the way I looked at life, the way I looked at a lot of things. And I knew I really was focused on that inner work at that point, at about a year and a half of looking at my history, making peace with old resentments, old remorse, old regrets. And I happened to see a made-for-TV movie called Sybil. Sybil, this was not back in 1976, and it was a made-for-TV movie about a woman that had 16 different multiple personalities. Very fascinating story. I was actually riveted to the TV, very fascinating. Toward the end of the movie, the Sybil character had a therapist that was going to walk her through a visualization where she was going to introduce her to these variety of 16 different personalities. And about the third one that she was introducing her to, and it was in a park-like setting, you could hear the voiceover. The film depicted the voice of the therapist and the Sybil character kind of roaming through a park-like setting. About the third one that came out from behind a piece of shrub to be introduced to Sybil was a little 12-year-old girl named Peggy. And Peggy had her fists up like a boxer. And I so viscerally identified, I started to hyperventilate and sob, and I just sobbed my way through the end of it. I knew that at the age of 12, that I didn't have an adult around that was going to help guide me to sane adult living, and that I had damn well better make it up. And I made it up from a 12-year-old's maturity. And so it had a lot of manipulation in there, a lot of fear-based stuff, a lot of aggression. And so I just cried my way to the end, and I thought, well, I don't have a multiple personality, but how hard can this be? And so I decided I was 32 at the time. I was going to talk to these younger selves. So I went through the family album, and I got a picture of myself at about 3 that I really quite liked. She's a little bright-eyed kid that didn't know what was ahead of her. And I got an 8-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old, and 18-year-old. And being 32, I didn't think to go older at the time. So I had this group. And one night, a week or so later, I decided to just do a meditation without really knowing how, a visualization. And I wrote out what I wanted to say to them, read it over a time or two, and then I went on into the, my mind's eye and imagined this little group of Beckys before me. And I said to them, I am very sorry about the way our life has gone. And if I could change it, I would change it. But you need to know I cannot. But I have found this path, this spiritual path that I'm committed to. And I will not be shoving drugs and alcohol in you anymore. I will not be shoving food down your throat, nor will I be starving you. And I will not put you around people that don't treat you with a certain level of respect. If I find myself in a disrespectful environment, I promise you an exit. You do not deserve that kind of treatment. I didn't know they were going to talk back. I didn't know they were going to talk to each other. So it became a very creative, very dynamic healing tool for me. A few months later, what I discovered was an unexpected age came into my inner family meeting. And this was a young 28-year-old mother who was overweight. She'd had to give up amphetamines and her weight had gone up and up and up. And she was unable to be a loving, caring parent to her toddler children. She came in uninvited, unexpected, and she represented herself with dried cake blood all over her shoulders and around her face. And I was stunned and didn't know what to make of that for a minute or two. And while I froze, my little 3-year-old Becky went over to her and gently tried to take off the dried cake blood. And I said to her, I know what you're trying to show me is your level of self-loathing for not being able to be a loving parent to your young children. I'm not going to try to make that okay, because that's not acceptable. But self-loathing isn't acceptable either, and we will find something valuable about you, and we do want you to be part of our inner family. So this inner family concept has not only helped me break all these dependencies on the variety of my addictions that I'm in recovery from, but it has helped me heal my history and to become a woman that I can respect and be proud of today. Not a perfect woman, that is not the goal. The goal is to be a woman that I respect. So this is the deeper, longer term work. The most recent book that I wrote, it outlines for people who don't have addictions my path of inner family healing. So that's an option for people to get on their own too. It's Seeking, Finding, Healing, the complete guide to self-directed inner family healing. All right, number 6, we want to create a healthy relationship with these 4 things: our disease, our recovery, our history, and our historical self. So I'm going to go through those last 4 things one at a time. A healthy relationship with our disease, I have a little 4-point scenario. The first point is, you know you have it. The second point is, you're willing to learn as much about it as you can learn. The third point is, you know what the medicine is, and you take the medicine whether you're having a good day or a bad day. For us, our medicine is breakfast, lunch, and dinner moderately, planned moderate meals, nothing in between, no matter what. That's our medicine. And the fourth one is to make lifestyle changes necessary to keep it in remission. So got to know you got it, got to learn as much about it as you can learn, got to take the medicine no matter what, got to make lifestyle changes. That little 4-point scenario would be true whether you're looking at diabetes, epilepsy, heart condition. Got to know you got it. Got to be willing to learn about it. Got to take the medicine no matter what. Got to make lifestyle changes. Sometimes I'll say to somebody, if you had a friend who called you up and said, I think I'm going to have to file for divorce. I didn't take my heart medicine today. You'd say, wait a minute, what? Why are you connecting those things? Why would you not take your heart medicine? Because you're, like you would hear the insanity if somebody said that. So that's why I try to make it a clear point that we take our medicine no matter what. And for those of you who know me or know some of my history, read my books, you know that my kids were 3 and 7, I think, when I started my recovery path. And I knew that they inherited the predisposition for addictions. And my son actually died of his alcoholism, liver failure, cirrhosis, etc. In 2015 at the age of 47. The ability to let my very young mother, who had every hope and dream, that when she held that baby in her arms, cry and cry and cry for the loss of all her dreams. I wasn't surprised that it happened because I saw the way he lived, but the young mother in me had every dream just crash around her. The young 45-year-old mother that was the parent to a drug-using young man, she needed to grieve every mistake she made or every mistake she felt she had to make. So from my inner family concept, I was able to walk through one of the most impossible situations you could ever imagine with some stability and some self-respect and hopefully some grace. So healthy relationship with our disease, healthy relationship with our recovery. The second one there is I like using the analogy of graduate school. When you make a decision to go to graduate school, you know you got to reprioritize your family life, your social life. You got to read books, maybe write papers. You know, there's a lot to do in the first 2 to 5 years when you're getting that advanced degree. And I think if you can look at recovery in the same way, there's a lot of work to it to find that level of healing, that level of freedom from the yearning that I'm talking about. The last two, a healthy relationship with our history, I've already described by talking in detail about my inner family. And then the last one is a healthy relationship with our historical selves. And from my work in my inner family model, their dependencies are on me, and my dependency is on a power greater than myself, a higher power. So I am going to say goodbye to the video, and I'm going to stop it and come back to you guys.